My name is Donald Thomas. I'm a reporter for the Yonkers News in New York. Today I had to make a report on a man and a certain incident involving this man. His name is Nigel Goodman. Before I dive into what happened to this man, you must at least know who he is, for it's the least I can do for the poor fella. Nigel Goodman is a 45-year-old man that is a neighborhood sweetheart among the people. Everyone knew who he was, from the time he was a kid to an adulthood, but it was not how long he lived, it was what he was doing when he was growing up. As a young lad, he volunteered for the homeless shelter. He even raised money for Toys R Tots. He also raised money for the local orphanage. At his time during high school, he ran and was elected school council president. Now, as feeble as it may sound in that position, Goodman had done a lot since his time in the position. He rebuilt some old classrooms that were not used and used those classrooms to help students interact with each other after school, where games can be played, friendships could be forged, and memories can be created. Even after high school, Goodman was true to his namesake, a good man. Throughout his adulthood, he went to the college for a career in the medical field and graduated in a degree in medicine at the age of 35. From what I could gather, his life was going great. A well-loved doctor, a wife with 3 children. He even bought a big house and turned it into a family home to retire in and for future generations to inherit it after he's long gone. Again, life was going good for Nigel Goodman. But all good things must come to an end, right? 'Cause now here comes the reason why I'm writing about this poor man and the incident he was involved in and what role he had to play in the incident. It started on June 16th, 2020, when Goodman was acting strangely. He seemed more depressed and anxious than usual, and no one seemed to know why, and those who asked him out of worry, he would always reply with, "I am fine. Everything is fine," and would leave in his car for home. Throughout the following few days, Goodman's behavior became even stranger, as he would not show up for work and would stay cooped up in his family home, and during the night, the neighbors could hear shouting and screaming coming from Goodman's house, even though he was all alone. As Goodman's behavior keeps getting worse and worse, rumors have spread, but one rumor was proven true. Goodman's wife was divorcing him. As a result, took not only half of Goodman's wealth and the family van, but took all 3 children with her to be with another man, which later I found out was his own best friend, Arnold Baldrum, the frickin' snake, who was just as old, but is not as successful as Goodman. Goodman, on his end, changed from depression to more anger. Just angry. He just even became more prone to snap at his neighbors whenever they bring up his ex-wife and shout at them to drop the subject and to never bring her up again. Neighbors would even catch Goodman punching and kicking his car out of anger. It would be out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he even successfully managed to break one of the car doors down. It was at that point that the neighbors kept their distance from Goodman and, in my opinion, worsened his behavior. And now, the incident. The incident that shook the town in shock and absolute terror, for it was an incident that the town will never forget. It happened on the night of June 25th, 2020. That was the night that I also went out to get some scoops on Goodman to see what he was doing for the next headline. You can call me heartless all you want, but I am a reporter. That is my job. Get over it. I waited for Goodman to come out of his house, for I had a lead that Goodman would leave his house in the middle of the night and drive off to somewhere and wouldn't come back for hours. I assumed he was just going out to the night of town since, he's not married anymore. But I had to do this for the sake of my boss so she can get off my butt for not having good headlines. After an hour of waiting, the lead was solid. For Goodman had left his house and to his car and drove off to the east part of town, with me following him in a safe distance. After following Goodman for a while, he finally stopped by a house. Now, This house was big enough to fit a family. In fact, on the lawn I see a few children's toys, so the person living here must have a family. I was kind of curious to what he was doing here, especially since he most likely does not recognize us, or maybe he does. But in my case, with the camera ready in my hands, I see Goodman leave his car, but as I snap a few photos, I caught something in Goodman's hands. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big and he was hiding it under his coat. That's when I heard it. A large multitude of crashing sounds, as now I see that Goodman was carrying a large axe and had broken down the door of the house. Of course, I quickly called the cops, but what I heard in the house was they were shouting and yelling. From what it sounded like 3 adults. But I assumed that one of them had to be Goodman. What followed was a sound of crashing and a struggle. Against my own judgment to stay in the car where it's safe, I couldn't just stay here and let Goodman commit what he was going to do, so I left to help stop Goodman. But, well, I acted too late, for I heard the sound of an axe penetrating or being implanted in what it feels like flesh or bone or maybe both. And then I heard a woman scream. But I kept hearing the sound of an axe hitting flesh and feared the worst when the scream of the woman suddenly stopped, followed with more sounds of the axe penetrating flesh and bone. I was frozen with fear. The fear of what Goodman would do to me if he knew that I was here to witness his crime. I kept hearing the sound of axe chopping flesh and bone as I heard the Goodman shouting, "You goddamn bitch! We had a good life and you destroyed it!" Goodman was more than angry. He sounded furious, but his voice and the chopping sound became more violent than ever. Everything was perfect. Everything! We had a house, amazing income, wonderful kids, but you couldn't keep your legs closed, you fucking whore! You deserve this. People like you and him get what they deserve! I just stood outside hearing him shout and scream as he kept chopping what I assume now are just bits and pieces of the unfortunate people receiving his fury. After a while, the shouting and the chopping stopped. I felt like my legs could move again once I heard the sirens in the distance, but I felt compelled to go inside. Once again, against my better judgment, I quickly went inside, but soon after I reached near what I thought was the living room, I heard Goodman crying. I kept going, and when I finally reached the living room, let's just say it would make the bravest of men vomit out of the horror that I had witnessed and the carnage that Goodman had committed. The living room was soaked in blood. Couches, furniture, family photos, all splattered with it. It was everywhere. On the walls, everywhere. Oh, sorry. Goodman. He was right there, standing on top of a pile of chopped up body parts and organs. And he was crying. He was crying over the wicked deed that he had committed. The gore of it all was terrifying to see, for I had never seen a more gruesome scene since I had to cover a report about a killer that would always steal the victim's eyes and tongues 3 years ago. I was a good man. I listened to the crying Goodman as I hear cars pulling up to the house. I was a good husband, a good father, a good doctor. Goodman continues as the cops charge in guns at the ready, and they told Goodman to stay where he is. Goodman looked up to me and asked, I am a good person, aren't I? After Goodman was arrested and taken into questioning, he revealed that his divorce was not the worst of what happened to his marriage. See, his wife was already having an affair with Belgium for 2 years before the eventual divorce, and Goodman knew about it. Luckily, the children were not in that house, for they had spent the night with their grandparents. So, I My blessings go out to those children now that they won't live their life without their mother or their father. But neither Goodman was a good man. But even good men harbor a monster of their own. That's all I have for today. But stay tuned for some more updates to the stories I have covered for Goodman was not the last tragedy that this town had to face. In fact, Goodman was just the first of many of the few things that happened in this town this year. Hey everybody, it's Keiichi. I just want to let you know that yes, I am going to do the other 6 sins, and it's going to be, we'll have a little fun with this and try to guess and see what sin that each story is representing. I tell you the story, I do it as vaguely as possible, and it's up to you to figure out what sins have been committed on this story. But anyway, the Discord server is finally up, and it's going to be in the link in the description down below. So if you ever want to join in, if you're a fan of my streams, or maybe you're a fan of my stories, come right on in. There's a section for everybody. So please read the rules and you'll be just fine. But anyway, that's all I have to say for tonight. Have a good night and try to have sweet dreams.